Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Go ahead and put where you're located in the chat. We want to know where you're calling in from. I'll put mine in here. I'm calling in from Chicago.
I am based in Omaha, Nebraska, everyone. Yep, there are people there.
And
I'm
you
one
are
of them.
one of them. Oh, we got California, Sacramento, Connecticut. We've got a Michigan. I'm originally from Ohio, so hello, Michigan. Chicago.
Oh, I see a fellow Omahaan. Welcome. See, I'm not the only one who lives here either.
There's at least two people.
At least. We've got a St. Louis, someone from Kansas, down South Florida. Hope you're staying safe. Floridians. Another California. Okay, we've got our participants trickling in here again. If you're just joining us, let us know where you're calling in from today. Lots of people from Chicago.
And Lindsay, I see that somebody has raised their hand. Looks like Lexi might have a question. I don't know if anyone's going to be able to come off mute or needs to just ask a question in the chat.
Yeah, so Lexi, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I will be mining the chat today and will try my best to get to everyone's questions. At the end of this webinar, if I do not address your questions, we will be sure to address those via email following this webinar. Oh, it looks like we have someone from Switzerland. Hello.
Welcome.
Welcome, welcome.
All right. We will go ahead and get started then. So welcome everyone. Thanks so much for sharing your location and thanks so much for joining us today. We're really excited to be here. Rachel and I can't wait to share with you the findings and results from the research that we recently conducted in order to refresh our diversity, equity, inclusion survey framework. We are really excited about it because of the additional steps that we took. We believe that DEI is so much more than a program or an activity. DEI can really be a tool to help organizations and their people thrive in today's environment. And let's face it, we need all the tools we can have right now to be able to survive and thrive in today's ever-changing environment. So we wanted to make sure that we provide our clients with data, and not just any old data, but data that matters. And in this case, it's employee opinion, ensuring that you are asking questions that matter to your employees about DEI. So in turn, when you're making data-driven decisions, you're acting on what matters most to your employees to be able to maximize your outcomes. So to do that, we believe that we need to apply inclusion. So taking additional steps to ensure that we're getting at differing perspectives and taking those into account in the research too, which is what we'll be sharing today. All right, so we're going to start off with some introductions. For anyone who isn't familiar with the Kaleidoscope Group, I'll share a little bit about our company. And then we will each introduce ourselves here on the panel. And then Rachel will walk you through the framework so that you can see the 7 factors or elements that together comprise inclusion. Then we'll talk you through the different steps that we took, this inclusive research and applied inclusion that we use to be able to develop the framework itself. And then we'll end with talking about how do we apply these principles that we discussed about inclusive research? How do we ensure the voices are heard, and why does that matter in making sure that we have better DEI outcomes? All right, so the Kaleidoscope Group, for anyone who's not familiar, we are diversity, equity, and inclusion specialists. It's all we do, right? We are trusted being one of the pioneers of DEI. The company has been around for over 30 years. We have helped, thousands of clients across pretty much every industry that there is. Our roots are in Chicago. That's where we're headquartered. However, we are a global company with about 75 consultants who span the globe. So many different countries, cultures, languages, and perspectives too. We're thought leaders. We have a diverse team of specialists, including Rachel and myself. We are part of the assessment and analytics team. So we use our expertise to help guide clients. As an organization, we believe that everyone brings value to this work. So we focus on bringing people together. We believe in finding new ways to drive DEI success, recognizing that anyone who's done any DEI work at all knows that this is an area that's constantly evolving and changing, right? We work hard to develop solutions that can help change with it and help, again, drive positive change forward. And finally, we're real people here with you today. And as a company, we ensure that we are committed to having real conversations with our clients, even the tough ones, which again, anyone who's done anything with DEI knows they come up, right? We do this because we really want to drive real change. All right, we'll introduce ourselves. I'll kick us off and then I'll turn it over to Rachel. So I'm Mary Hunter. I founded the assessment and analytics practice area here at the Kaleidoscope Group. I joined KG, as we refer to the Kaleidoscope Group, about 7 years ago. I spent the first 15 years of my career in market research, also known as consumer insights. So I helped companies make strategic marketing decisions by designing and executing custom qualitative and quantitative research. I did this with the US multicultural market. I specialize in US Latino. Given my background, I've spent time working and living in Latin America. I'm bilingual, bicultural, having, again, lived in both places, then branched out into the general market in the US and global work too. So I was really excited then to join the Kaleidoscope Group and use my background in really understanding clients' business issues in order to connect the dots between the data and helping drive action. So that's why around here, we're definitely not about data for data's sake. It's data to help support businesses, their people, and drive success forward for all. Rachel?
Thank you, Mary. So my name is Rachel Boglai, and I came to the Kaleidoscope Group about 1.5 years ago to lead the assessment and analytics team. So by education and experience, I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, and most people don't know what that is. But what I always say is it's a lot of words to say I help work stuff less for people on a daily basis. So for the past 15 years, I've been lucky enough to be able to do that. So I have been in both internal consulting roles and external consulting roles, private, public sector, across industries, and the smallest of the small organization to the biggest of the big organization. And mostly I've focused my work on measuring the efficiency, the effectiveness, and business outcomes of people programs, both in a qualitative and a quantitative manner, using different research methods and different analysis. So I've been lucky enough to be able to do this and be at the Kaleidoscope Group. I'm very happy to be able to join all of you today and present some of the research that we've recently conducted.
And I'll go next. Hello, everyone. Again, thank you for joining us today. My name is Lindsay Chardelli, and I'm a senior business consultant. Been with the Kaleidoscope Group for about 5 years. And really, my role is relationship management with our clients, and I support with contracting needs and change management. And if you're just now joining, I will be mining the chat and addressing any questions that come up for you all. I'll try my best to get to all of them. And if I do not today, we will send our answers to those questions via email after this webinar. I'd also welcome you all to reach out to Jody and myself after this webinar if you'd like to continue the discussion and learn a bit more about how we can support you all in your DEI journey.
Okay, so with that, let's get into our first content slide. So what is a DEI survey? Before I talk about the framework, I really want us to take a step back and really talk about what a DEI survey is and what it is not. So when you talk to some people, they'll say that a DEI survey is really an index of about 4 questions included on their regularly scheduled employee engagement or employee experience survey. Other people are going to say that maybe it's a pulse survey with, less than 10 questions that are run periodically to take a temperature around DEI. Both of these are really high-level surveys, and that means that the topics around DEI are asked at a much broader level. And so it's not meant to diagnose what's actually happening. Rather, it's to take the temperature to see if any issues are currently present. And so an example of this is a question about communication. I've seen survey questions that say, how satisfied are you with the level of communication in your organization? Think about how different that is versus a question like, we have open and honest communication on my team, or when I speak up, my opinion is valued, or I can present an opposing viewpoint without fear of retaliation. They all are about communication, but they're coming at it from different angles. And that's really what we're focused on when we talk about DEI survey. To us, a DEI survey is an in-depth employee survey that only asks about DEI-related topics. And it's really meant to identify issues and opportunities with more precision. And this really empowers leaders to take action and create effective strategies to implement meaningful change within the organization. So another way that they're different from a typical employee experience or employee engagement survey is they're not conducted on a yearly basis or on every 6-month basis. Rather, we suggest that they should be run every 2 to 5 years. And this is really because the majority of action planning for a DEI survey is taken at the highest level rather than with individual team managers. The information provided from this type of survey is meant to create strategy and drive meaningful change, which is a longer term endeavor than quick wins. However, that's not to say you should not be asking any type of DEI questions on your regular survey. What we do recommend is, based on your strategies and initiatives, you select a handful of questions at most to ask about to see how you are progressing against those goals. So now that you know a little bit more about us and about what we consider a DEI survey, I want to launch our first poll. We want to get to know more about you. So what kind of DEI survey does your organization currently use? So Lindsay's going to put a poll up, and we'll give everyone a little bit of time to answer.
All righty, the poll has been launched. Select your answers. All right, we have 52% response. Let's get that up to at least 80% before we close this poll out. Oh, we're at 64, 66.
We always push for a good response rate around here.
Very true. Very true.
A nerdy survey joke. It's looking like kind of the clear standout here is the DEI index on an engagement survey.
Yep. All right, we're going to go ahead and end this poll. And here are our results.
Yep. Looks like it that standout is that DEI index that Rachel was talking about, which again, we're not saying is a bad thing. Yay to everybody who includes it. What we want to recognize too is that, of course, it's often used to take more of a temperature check, right? Are there issues with DEI? Not be able to prescribe what exactly are the issues with DEI to be able to address them too. So a good way to take that temperature check, to maybe check on progress too, is it going up or down? The only thing that we also always advise on is ensuring that you know what's behind the index to make sure that those measures again are connected to what you're working on. Great, okay. So before we get into sharing, the framework itself and the research, we're going to share a little bit about why, again, we decided to refresh our DEI survey. I'll jump in here because, again, I founded the assessment and analytics practice area. So I was involved in developing the survey years ago that we had was scientifically validated. We got a lot of great feedback from clients. It's been run among tens and tens of thousands of employees. So you may be wondering why we would decide, to redesign a survey that was already working so well. And it has to do with change. Again, we believe that DEI is more than a program or activity. It can be a tool to help support positive change. And we wanted to recognize and acknowledge that our workplaces and our lives have all changed radically in the past few years. So what employees expect, what they want is now different. And we thought it would be a great opportunity to find ways and be intentional about ensuring that we include those perspectives and think about the differences in developing a framework that would be applied over and over.
So instead of making all of you wait until the very end of the webinar to see the new and improved framework, I'm going to share it with you now. So our framework is consisted of 7 key factors, and these are the different elements that make up workplace inclusion. So this is the culmination of at least 6 months of me and Mary's lives, right? We were very much in this and in the weeds, and we'll talk more about how we ended up there throughout the rest of this presentation.
Tell me it was at least a good 6 months, Rachel. Come on, it was a good 6 months, right?
I mean, it was a very wonderful 6 months because I'm a nerd and I like this stuff, but it was still 6 months. I was like flashbacks to dissertations. So when we look at the different factors, we ask about 4 questions on the survey for each of them. And that's really to get at the topic from multiple perspectives. So let's talk a little bit about these 7 factors. So the first is commitment to DEI values and practices. And employees really want to see that the organization is making a commitment to DEI. And this can be done by embedding that into policies and procedures and practices. It can even be done by taking action on survey results when you solicit feedback from those employees. The next one is accountability, and accountability really focuses on everyone sharing ownership and responsibility of inclusion and creating an inclusive workplace. When we talk about equity, we're referring to fair treatment and access for all, and everyone being able to have those same opportunities. Connection is really between the relationship between that individual and the organization. It's about feeling like they belong and that they're valued for who they are. When we talk about voice, it's usually a hot spot for a lot of organizations, and it's really focused on communication and employee opinions being valued and heard. So employees are really telling us that when they speak up, they want to know that they're not going to be retaliated against, that when they speak up, they're able to be heard and listened to. And this is what this particular factor gets at. The next one is differences, which is valuing each unique identity people have and really valuing those differences as a way to get work done. And finally, representation is the perceived level of diversity within the organization, through each level of that management chain. So with that, I'm going to send you back over to Mary to talk a little bit about how we got here.
All right. So as I mentioned, when we decided to do this refresh, we were very intentional in thinking through and planning out the process for how we were going to do this. And we wanted to, yes, get new employee opinions, meaning like we didn't want to rely on years old data. We wanted today's environment, right? But we also wanted to take it a step further and again, apply inclusive research and applied inclusion steps to ensure that not only we included everyone in the research itself, but we took different perspectives into account to make sure that voices were actually heard in the results themselves. So inclusive research is something that I'm very passionate about. Anyone who knows me knows that I've spent a lot of my career in trying to work on different ways in both the collection of data, in designing the questions that we ask, and on the back end too, in interpreting what everyone has said, to think through how to make sure that we include everyone. Inclusive research itself is defined broadly because it can encompass many different methods, many different techniques, but kind of the point is making sure that populations are at the table, all populations, particularly those who have often been excluded or marginalized in the past too. So it does require extra steps to do that.
Yeah, and to that point, that getting to those populations is rarely simple or straightforward. And these groups have historically been excluded from research because they're often hard to reach. So if you're not sure what historically marginalized or excluded means, it's really a broad definition. And it can include minority, racial, or ethnic populations, but it can also include different communities of people, including veterans, the LGBTQ plus community, or even people that are neurodiverse. There's a lot more groups out there that are now being taken into consideration. And what we wanted to do here was apply principles that we call applied inclusion to take different steps in the research process and practice to ensure that each of these voices from different groups are heard and considered in the final outcome. So on the next slide, I'll walk you through the 4 main steps that we took. Okay, so as a step back, as someone who's trained in statistics and have done a lot of that in my lifetime, I can assure all of you that we did all of the traditional stuff to design and validate the survey. You know, reapplied descriptive statistics, correlations, regressions, reliability testing, and we have a really high Cronbach's alpha. And if you want to ever talk about all of those statistics, I am happy to do so. We just don't have time for that today, so feel free to reach out to me and happy to get that on the calendar. But what I did want to talk about with everyone is the differences in how we approach this work that really were unique. And we use them in a way to develop a survey that really resonates across all groups of people. And it gives us really great confidence in saying that we not only included all of the voices in our research, but we also found a way to give them a voice and take them account into the data. So let's talk through each of these. And I'll hand it off to Mary to talk about leveraging our differences.
Thanks, Rachel. I'll also add, by the way, that for anyone who wants a lot more of the details too, we do have a white paper that includes a lot more detail around all the steps that we took to kind of get to where we're at. So please feel free to reach out to Jody or any of us afterwards, and we'd be happy to send it to you. So the first step that we took is, again, in the design of the survey that we were going to actually test, right? Once we have that to test, and Rachel's going to walk you through all the statistical magic that we did to also ensure that we included the different voices. But the first step is, what are we going to actually test? We wanted to apply inclusion here too. So to do that, we took our own diversity into account. And the first one was to make sure that we included multidisciplinary specialists. We did not want to have a singular viewpoint in designing what we wanted to test. So we had 17 different individuals from, IO psychology, multidisciplinary researchers like myself who have a background in different types of survey research and qualitative research, et cetera. We had HR, DEI, change management practitioners, consultants, intercultural specialists, wide range, right? We took then everything else that made all of us who we are too into account. And as you can see, there was a lot of diversity among these 17 individuals too. We had 26 plus attributes, right? So thinking about gender, age, race, ethnicity, all these different elements or dimensions of diversity, there was a lot represented on the team too. And we did this intentionally to ensure that we included differing perspectives when deciding what to include. And finally, we also were very broad in our research that we conducted too. It was both academic and publicly available research, along with other surveys that are out there too. It was almost 30 different resources that we examined to take this into account to come up with the 43 items that we decided to run with and go ahead and test. So when we decided to test, we needed to go and of course execute the survey, right? We wanted to ensure that this was that first step, the inclusive research practices. Usually the fundamental is making sure you include your intended population in your actual research. This doesn't happen naturally when you go out and invite people to take a survey. You kind of often get whoever happens to respond. So we made sure to build in partnership with a panel, a representative sample, so representative of the US labor force. And that you can see on that column on the left, right? So this is the representation of US employees, right? On the right, we have our pilot sample. We were able to balance it quite well for gender, race, and ethnicity. When it came to generation, we needed to be a little bit looser and align it as close as we could, make sure we had a large enough sample to be able to examine these, partially just because of the way that these panels are built. They tend to skew younger, and it can be harder to get older individuals in the workforce too. So, and then finally, we kind of set maximums on the industries to avoid another common error that can come up, which is if you don't balance for this, you may get individuals who take your test survey who skew heavily towards one or two industries. We don't want that, because what we know is that what employees want and need and expect from the workplace does also depend on what they do for a living, right?
Exactly. And what we also wanted to do is really look at those different demographics. So like I said, we did all of the high level demographics. And remember, we tested 43 items. And at this point, we really needed to decide which of those questions matter most to employees, which to keep and which to ditch, really. And because they didn't matter to respondents as much. So often when designing a survey or really looking at the information and analyzing that data set, we look at the total population. So in this case, the total pilot sample. And that's typically used to define those key drivers or predictors of our outcome variable. And in this case, it was workplace inclusion. So we first ran that. And here are the top 5 predictors based on that regression analysis. However, in our experience, and much to what we've just talked about, different demographics really want and need different things from the workplace. So we made sure to take each of these different demographic groups into account. And I want to say that there were close to 20 by the time this was all said and done. And when we do top level analysis, we can often see that the majority group within the population or within that sample set really skews the data. But here we can see how that's not always the case. So, for example, our white demographic group made up about 59% of the sample. And we see that they only have one overlapping predictor in the top 5. The male demographic was more similar to those top 5 ratings at an overall level, but that population was 49% of the sample. So we can see that really different groups are looking at different things. And if we're only using that top level analysis, we can really unintentionally water down our results and take action in ways that are not truly satisfying to anyone.
So Rachel, before you move on, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to I think you mentioned this, but just to make sure that it's abundantly clear to everyone, these are not every single demographic group that we looked at when analyzing our pilot sample, right? So those who went out, took the survey, now it's time to test the survey and land on, what final items would be. As Rachel mentioned, it was up to like getting close to 20 different groups. So we looked at generation, we looked at other racial and ethnic groups that you don't see here. Just to make sure that it was readable for you all, we chose a subset to show on today, because if we included all of them here, nobody would see anything on the slide, right?
Yeah,
So,
you'd get some ugly SPSS table is what you'd
that's
see.
right.
So we pared it down to make it readable here. And I think really what this points to is that we can't necessarily draw any hard conclusions about looking at the data specifically at the demographic group. But what it does do is demonstrate the value of breaking out each demographic group in the analysis. So based on this, we were able to include some decision criteria to help us select those final survey items that were going to be included. And with that, we wanted to make sure to cover a wide range there. So our criteria was that for each item, we needed to have it show up as a key driver for at least 3 of those 20 plus demographic groups. Okay, but before we could call this a day and select what items we wanted, we took one more level step in the analysis, and that is to conduct a heartbeat analysis. So heartbeat analysis is actually something that the IO psychologists over at Google developed a few years ago, and it's becoming more and more commonplace in survey research. What the heartbeat analysis does is allow us to really take a look at the individual level of data. So each person who provides a response to the survey. So what we do is we develop a baseline for each of those individuals using all of the different responses to all of the different questions on the survey. And we take that as an average. So here you'll see that is represented by that blue dotted line of 3.87. The next thing we do is develop criteria of what is and is not an extreme score. So in this case, we selected one standard deviation to be a cutoff for what we considered an extreme score. So the purple shaded area around that blue dotted line represents one standard deviation above and one standard deviation below that average score. Now you'll also see little hearts on the page. And the little hearts represent those extreme scores where people had much more passion when they were answering the question. So it deviated from their normal response pattern. So by looking at this, we can really see, where people are showing lots of feeling. And once we have that analyzed for every single individual and across all of the items, we tally up the upvotes and downvotes by item in order to see what are the questions that people had kind of the most extreme responses to, or where they responded outside of their normal pattern. So you might ask, why are we even doing this? And here's an example of how this information compares to something, say, like the percent favorable. So we're talking about percent favorable. We're talking about the percentage of employees who agreed or strongly agreed on whatever that survey item was. So in the case of our sample data, I have here the top 10 items that were upvoted by the respondents. Next to that, you'll see the favorability rank. So remember, there were 43 items. So the number one upvoted question also had one of the lowest favorabilities on the survey. So what that tells us is that favorability isn't going to give us the whole story. Rather, including heartbeat gives us one more chapter to that. And it demonstrates to us that this is where people, deviated, and this is where people have a more extreme reaction. So it is something that's still important to them, and more important than probably the thing that was most agreed upon. Okay. So I want you to think about heartbeat analysis as an added value. It's not necessarily something you need to do on every single survey. You don't always have to go this deep, but it's great to use and consider if you're doing a deep dive, or if you're trying to figure out how people are feeling more strongly about different topics, whether that's positive or it's negative. Okay. So before I move us to the next poll, is there anything you wanted to add, Mary, about our process?
I think the only thing that I might go ahead and address, if it's okay, is I did see a couple of questions pop up. And since they were about what we're talking about now, I'm just going to jump right in. I know one had been if we included biracial employees or, part of the workforce too, which we did. We did include multiracial as an option too, since it is a smaller part of the US population. It didn't make it into all of the slides today, but it was definitely a part of the research. And then intersectionality. So the process that Rachel was walking us through as we ran the driver analysis for, up to 20 different demographic groups, these are all the same individuals, but it's cutting it out by their differing identities. So cutting out the same, like if I took the survey, my response by I identify as a woman, by I'm a Gen Xer, I am a white individual in the United, we had many different ways that we look at it. And we took my answers, I didn't actually take it, but I'm providing myself as an example, into account into deciding this. So it's a natural way to look at intersectionality and breaking out all the different ways that people, identify themselves and what, who they are.
Thank you. So with all of that and all the heavy stuff we just talked about, I really want to understand all of your perspectives. So in your opinion, which of the 4 applied inclusion steps are most critical to support strong DEI insights? So we'll launch the poll, and I'm really excited to see your responses.
Thank you, Rachel. Alrighty, select one of the below. We're at 20% response. Let's get that up to 80% if we can. I always feel like we should play some Jeopardy music,
That would be
maybe next time we will.
Alrighty, we're up to about 50%. Let's get a couple more in there, team. All right, we'll give it 5 more seconds and we'll close out this poll. All righty, here are our results.
Awesome. So it looks like each of the different topics got roughly the same amount of people, with a little bit lower in the testing the survey among a representative sample. But leveraging our differences to design the content at 31%, testing the survey with a representative sample at 19%, breaking out the data by key demographics 31%, and examining extreme scores to gain deeper understanding. So thank you all for providing those responses. I think it's fascinating that we got such an even breakout across the different items, or rather steps. Okay, so now we're going to take this story full circle. So at this point, we ran all of these different analyses, lots and lots of data points to consider. And we needed to finalize our survey and determine what questions were actually going to be included in the survey. So we went back to the beginning and leveraged our subject matter experts to debate, talk, advocate, sometimes argue about which items should be included and why. And what we ended up with was 27 items across those 7 elements or factors of workplace inclusion to be included in that final survey.
Thank you, Rachel. I love the "and argue."
I mean, hey, it happens. It's productive. It was productive.
Right? Remember, we're a DEI consultancy. We respectfully disagree. We don't argue around here. All right. So before we kind of close out by talking about how we can apply these principles to get better DEI outcomes, I'm going to take a really quick step back and remind us all as to why we did this. We did this because we really believe that DEI can be a tool to help us achieve positive change. And we recognize that we have all been through a lot of change in the last few years. A lot of change that many of us didn't want, right? But we need to recognize it's there. And I think if I've learned something from it, it's to recognize it's not going to end. For the rest of our careers and our lives, we're going to need to adapt. And we've also learned through this then that change is either led or it's going to drag us. So it depends on how we not only see it, but how we approach it, right? Change is made or it breaks us. So we need to be able to change well. We need to be able to have those muscles and those tools to survive today. And for us at KG, we believe that changing well means that we build things up instead of tearing them down, which is why unity is our vision too. So DEI is a tool to help you adapt, right? I've been going on and on about it since I joined you today. And we were really happy to see that Bain & Company has done some research too that would indicate that they also have a correlation between organizations that have a structural ability to change. So they have demonstrated that they have the tools in place and they can change, are also the organizations that invest in DEI. So there's a correlation between being good at DEI and being good at change. They published this research, by the way, in the Harvard Business Review, and Lindsay's going to share a link to that research in the chat for anyone who's interested in reading up on it. It's really fascinating. I recommend you take a peek. So again, knowing that DEI can help you change, knowing that DEI can help you if we use it well to help our people and our organizations thrive, right? Then it becomes important. It's important to make sure that we measure what matters. It's important to ensure we're asking the right questions, because if we're not, then the data that we're using, the opinions that we're using aren't actually related to helping guide us to take actions that are going to have the impact we want. We need to understand what matters to our employees. That means asking the right questions, but it also means including the voices and finding a way to recognize different perspectives. I just want to acknowledge too, because I know we had at least one global attendee, maybe more, that in the US, there are different laws and there's kind of a different set of norms for what we look at. And race, ethnicity, along with gender, generation, many different factors are often looked at. I know that this is different elsewhere, so we would need to take a different approach. But the key is to make it okay to have different perspectives, make it okay to try to dive deeper, to understand that not every employee is seeing and experiencing the workplace in the same way. So being able to leverage, research and analytical tools to help support that in the data can be very important to help make better decisions, because we don't want watered down results where really nobody is getting what's important to them because we've taken an average from what all these different opinions said. We want to be able to dive in and better understand these to make better informed decisions, even if they are for the organization as a whole. And all of this means that we can prescribe more meaningful action. No more guesswork on what we should do next. No more trying to think about, what training, what activities, what's going to actually help us. We can leverage our employee opinions and demonstrate inclusion to them, show them that their voice mattered. We asked your opinion. Now we're acting on it too, to be able to take meaningful action. This will lead to greater impact with DEI. So with that, we are at the end. And Lindsay, do you have any other questions that have come up in the chat?
Yes, thank you, Mary. A couple attendees have sent me some direct messages and some questions that we'd like to ask. So, and again, if any of them come up for you all, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll try our best to get to them today. If drivers of inclusion are so different across different population groups, does this mean all our DEI solutions should be tailored to meet individual needs? Great question. Mary, Rachel?
Rachel, you want to take it or you want me to?
I'll go ahead and take it. What I'll say is that, yes, there are differing needs and perspectives in the data, and different employees and different demographic groups need different things. What we recommend is really focusing on making sure people are having what they need in an equitable way so that they can produce their best work. And, you know, that might be different for different people. And also recognizing that organizations need to be able to scale, right? So in some cases, it's best to really dig into that information a little bit more and do additional research such as focus groups to really help bring people together and understand what it is that they're looking for and determine whether or not it's a policy or practice change that can be done at a higher level. Because really what's most important with DEI is that people are feeling heard and that action is taken.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rachel. Another question that came up, how can a survey item get upvoted, as you say, but then not be favorable? Doesn't an upvote equal a like?
So I'll take that question also. So in terms of the upvotes and the downvotes, so I want you to think about it like you're scrolling through social media, right? There's some things that you're looking at and you provide an upvote. And there's some that you do that you provide a downvote. But for the most part, people just don't upvote or downvote or take the time to do that. And so really this shows us what are people taking the time to intentionally rate higher or lower than their average. So it shows sentiment and passion for how they're responding as opposed to what their average response would be, or the average amount of care that they're taking to respond to the survey questions.
Excellent. Mary, anything to add there?
No, I don't think so. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel. And then one more here. So if you're saying a deep dive into DEI is needed to prescribe the right actions, should I not be including a DEI index in my employee engagement survey? It's a great question.
That
Rachel?
is a really good question. I'll jump in just so that I can hog some of the light from away from But Rachel did think touched upon this when she was talking about the different ways that people see DEI surveys, and an index is certainly one that we believe is useful. So in telling everyone that, you know, it's very, very helpful to have a deep dive to prescribe your strategy and your action planning. It's not saying that it's kind of pointless to have an index. It can, again, provide a temperature check to let you know if there are any broad issues that are going on, or to give you a sense of if whether or not your efforts are working too. But only if, again, the measures behind that index are directly related to what you're working on at your organization too. So we always advise our clients to make sure they know what's behind that index. And if it's just not relevant for where they're at DEI, you can always take, if you do a deep dive like this, the core issues that you know you'll be acting on and help develop an index, that's relevant to your organization too, so that it can continue to serve that purpose of taking that temperature along the way.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mary. We have another wonderful question that this just came up. You all are asking some great ones today. Albert wants to know, talk a little bit about how emotional intelligence plays within the DEI scope.
Rachel, do you want to take that, or you want me to take a first stab?
Go for it. Go take a first stab.
Because I'm going to say it's a great question and it's really relevant, but I think the only reason we hesitate is there's no one answer, right? I think that for practitioners, it's critical to have emotional intelligence because, as we've all learned, anyone who's done anything in DEI, there are different perspectives about diversity, equity, inclusion itself, what's needed. What we learned through our research is employees have different needs and perspectives too about what they're looking for. So emotional intelligence can help us navigate these waters. They can help us learn to be aware of our own biases and help keep them in check. They can also help us manage our emotions as we're encountering people who see the world differently and see what we're working on in a different way too. So I think it's pretty critical for anyone who might be, navigating these waters. It's not something that we intentionally built into the survey instrument that we shared today, but I would like to think it's something that a lot of us of those of us who are working in the DEI space have been working on. So as we collaborated to design the instrument itself, that it was taken into account. Rachel, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think that you about covered it. What I'll say is that we've seen, over the past number of years that some of the most important traits or KSAOs that leaders have is that emotional intelligence piece. And I think it's really embedded into all facets of the workplace and making people feel included and heard, right? Because when you're fully focused and actively listening to people, they can tell and they can feel it. And, that's just one piece that is incorporated into workplace inclusion.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Rachel. And to wrap it up, so how can our participants get in touch with Kaleidoscope? How can we support them through their assessment journey, and any other insight that you can provide?
Thank you, Lindsay. Rachel, if you want to move to the next slide, we can put up the contact information. So if you would like to discuss any of this further, please reach out to Jody and she can schedule a complimentary 30-minute consultation with one of us. Could be Rachel and myself or one of our other assessment and analytics experts that we have here on the team, but we'd be happy to talk it through. You can also reach out to ask her, the white paper, and I believe too that Jody will be sharing a recording of today's session.
And trust me, we are happy to nerd out with you at any point in time about any of this stuff, if you can't tell how excited we get. So, please feel free to do so.
Excellent. Well, that's all of the questions we have for today.
Well, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you joining and sticking it out with us. We hope you learned a lot and we hope to hear from you. We really mean it when we say we'd love to connect with you outside of the webcast, so feel free to reach out.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.